Hi, this is Debbie from DIY Domination. Have you ever wanted to learn how to bake your own bread at home? Well, baking bread is simpler than you might think, and it can be a truly rewarding experience. Imagine the aroma of fresh bread wafting through your kitchen and the satisfaction of knowing you made it from scratch. Today, we'll guide you through the process of making a basic white bread loaf. But remember, bread baking can vary based on your preferences and the specific equipment you have. Our recipe calls for simple ingredients: 3 to 3.5 cups of all-purpose flour, 1 packet of active dry yeast, a cup of warm water, 2 tablespoons of sugar, 1 teaspoon of salt, and optionally, 2 tablespoons of olive oil or melted butter for added flavor and moisture. So, are you ready to bake some fresh homemade bread? Here we go. By the way, if you like this video and want to see more videos with cooking lessons, make sure to click the subscribe button and leave a comment down below saying I subscribed, and we'll do our best to reply to your comment. Our first step is to activate the yeast. This process begins by combining warm water and sugar in a small bowl. The water should be warm, not hot, around 110 degrees Fahrenheit or 43 degrees Celsius. Stir the mixture until the sugar completely dissolves. This sweet environment is perfect for our yeast. Sprinkle the yeast gently over the water and let it rest. In about 5 to 10 minutes, you should see some activity. The yeast will begin to react with the sugar and water, creating a frothy, creamy layer on top. This is exactly what we want to see. It shows that our yeast is active and ready to work its magic in our bread dough. Remember, yeast is a living organism, and it's this activation process that's going to give our bread that beautiful rise. Now that our yeast is activated, let's move on to mixing the dough. With our yeast ready, it's time to mix our dough. Now, in a large mixing bowl, let's combine 3 cups of all-purpose flour with 1 teaspoon of salt. Make sure they blend well, as this is the foundation of our bread. Next, let's bring in our activated yeast mixture. Pour it into the flour and watch as the dry ingredients welcome the wet ones. It's a beautiful symphony of textures and flavors, and it's just the beginning. Now, this next step is optional but highly recommended. Add 2 tablespoons of olive oil or melted butter to the mix. This not only gives the bread a rich flavor and moist texture, but also makes it smell heavenly as it bakes. Start to mix these ingredients until a dough forms. You're looking for a consistency that's not too wet but not too dry. It should feel sticky but not stick to your hands. With our dough mixed, it's time for some hands-on work. Now we're going to knead our dough. Kneading is a process that may seem intimidating, but it's actually a fun and satisfying step in bread making. We've got our dough, and it's time to get our hands dirty. Let's turn the dough onto a floured surface. We're aiming for a smooth, elastic texture. Begin by pushing the dough away from you with the heel of your hand, then fold it back onto itself. Turn the dough a quarter turn and repeat the process. This motion helps develop the gluten in the flour, which will give our bread its structure and texture. Don't worry if it's a bit sticky at first. If necessary, add more flour, but do so sparingly. After about 8 to 10 minutes of kneading, the dough should become smoother and more elastic, bouncing back when poked. With our dough kneaded, it's time for the first rise. This is where we'll see the magic of yeast at work. Patience is key in baking, as we move on to our first rise. After kneading, our dough needs a warm and cozy spot to rest and grow. This is where we see the magic of yeast at work. As the yeast ferments the sugar, it produces carbon dioxide gas that puffs up our dough, creating that light and airy texture we love in our bread. Place the dough in a lightly oiled bowl and cover it gently with a clean kitchen towel. The oil keeps the dough from sticking, and the towel maintains the perfect environment for our yeast. Now, find a warm spot in your home. It could be near a sunny window or even inside your turned-off oven. Here, let the dough sit undisturbed for about 1 to 2 hours. You'll know it's ready when it has doubled in size, looking plump and risen. After the first rise, we're ready to shape our loaf. Our dough has risen beautifully. Now let's shape it into a loaf. Begin by punching down the dough gently, releasing the air that's built up during the first rise. Then, turn the dough out onto a lightly floured surface. Shape the dough into a rectangle roughly the size of your loaf pan. Start rolling the dough tightly from one end, tucking in the sides as you go along. This will give your loaf a uniform shape and help it rise evenly. Once you've rolled your dough into a loaf shape, place it seam side down into a greased and floured loaf pan. Now cover your pan and allow the dough to rise once more. This second rise, also known as proofing, should take about 30 to 60 minutes. You're looking for the dough to reach the top of the pan but not spill over. While our dough takes its second rise, we'll preheat our oven. Before we can bake, we need to preheat our oven. The art of baking bread requires precision, and preheating your oven is a crucial step in this process. It ensures the temperature is just right for your dough to transform into a deliciously golden loaf. So let's set our oven to 375 degrees Fahrenheit or 190 degrees Celsius. This temperature is optimal for achieving that perfect crust and soft interior. With our oven preheating, our bread is almost ready for baking. Our dough has risen and our oven is hot. It's baking time! The magic begins as we place our shaped dough into the preheated oven. Set your timer for 25 to 30 minutes and be prepared for your kitchen to fill with the irresistible aroma of baking bread. As the minutes tick by, our loaf will transform from a pale dough to a golden brown masterpiece. Now, how do you know when your bread is perfectly baked? You're looking for a beautiful golden brown crust. The top of the loaf should be firm to the touch. And here's a little baker's secret. When you tap the bottom of the loaf, it should sound hollow. That's the sweet sound of success. Don't be tempted to slice into your hot, fresh bread right away. We need to let it cool down before the final step. As tempting as it is, we must let our bread cool before we can enjoy it. Let's talk about why cooling is crucial. When you take your bread out of the oven, it's still cooking from the residual heat. The moisture inside the bread is also redistributing itself. If you were to slice into it immediately, you'd find your bread gummy and undercooked. Cooling allows the bread to finish baking and settle into its final texture. Begin by allowing the bread to cool in the pan for about 10 minutes. This brief cooling period makes it easier to remove the bread from the loaf pan without it falling apart. After the initial 10 minutes, you can gently turn the bread out of the pan. Be careful here, the bread will still be hot. Next, transfer your bread to a wire rack. A wire rack allows air to circulate around all sides of the bread. This prevents the bottom from getting soggy, which can happen if you let it cool on a solid surface. If you don't have a wire rack, don't worry. You can improvise with a grill pan or even by placing the bread on its side. Now comes the hardest part. Waiting. The bread needs to cool completely before slicing. This could take a couple of hours, but it's well worth the wait. Cutting into a hot loaf can cause it to squish, and we don't want that after all the effort you've put into baking. Once the bread is completely cooled, it's time for the moment we've all been waiting for. The slicing. Use a serrated knife for the best results and don't rush it. Take your time to slice through the crust and into the soft, fluffy interior. You'll be rewarded with perfect slices of homemade bread. This is the culmination of your hard work and patience. Whether you slather it with butter, turn it into a sandwich, or simply enjoy it as is, it's sure to be delicious. After all, nothing beats the taste of freshly baked bread, especially when it's made by you. Now that you've mastered the basics, feel free to experiment. Don't be afraid to switch it up by trying different types of flours or adding in some seeds or nuts for an extra crunch. Maybe you want to get creative with your shaping techniques to give your bread a unique twist. There's a world of possibilities, and each one gives your homemade bread its own special character. Remember, baking is about experimenting and enjoying the process. Happy baking! If you liked this video, then make sure to also watch these videos for more DIY cooking lessons.